Welcome to the Crop Insurance Podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of crop insurance. I'm your host, Mike Rydell, a third-generation crop insurance agent, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this educational journey. At our family-owned and operated business, we've been providing crop insurance expertise for generations. Our goal here is simple, to educate our listeners. Crop insurance can be complex and overwhelming, but I believe that understanding it is crucial for every farmer. So whether you're a seasoned farmer looking to stay updated or a newcomer seeking guidance, this podcast is for you. Let's take a moment to thank some of our sponsors of the Crop Insurance Podcast. Our title sponsor, McNeil Insurance Agency, are probably your greatest insurance agents ever. They specialize in federal crop insurance and have since 1979. To visit their website, go to www.greatestagencyever.com. The McNeil Insurance Agency is a proud partner with the Crop West Insurance Group. Welcome to today's episode, which is part 2 in our Malt Barley Endorsement series. If you've not already listened to part 1, I suggest you go back as we'll be diving a little bit deeper into some of the concepts we spoke about in that episode. For those that did listen to the first episode, let's jump right back in. As we previously mentioned, one of the eligible type of contracts you can use to add the Malt Barley Endorsement is the Malting Barley Contract. When we spoke about the Malting Barley Contract, we did mention how you needed to contract 100% of your approved yield in order to take full advantage of that contract price. However, we didn't go into what it looks like when you don't contract enough bushels, so let's take a little deeper look into how that works. What you're going to want to do is take your total contracted bushels on your malting barley contract and divide it by your approved yield. That resulting number is going to be the maximum number of contracted acres that will apply towards your malt barley endorsement. When you carry this math out, if those acres don't add up to the total acres that you have seeded, then you're going to look at doing a weighted average in order to come up with that price. The way the weighted average works is you're going to take that number of acres that you got from the calculation of dividing the total bushels by your approved yield. You're going to multiply that times the contract price, and then you're going to add the leftover acres, the difference between that number and how many you actually seeded, and you're going to multiply those acres times the projected price on your underlying crop insurance policy. Once you add those two figures together, you're then going to divide by the total number of acres that you have seeded, and that will come up with your weighted average price in regards to what your malt barley endorsement will look like on your policy. I know that sounds a little bit confusing. Let's look at a real-life example so that we can do the math so it can help drive the point home. To help us, we're going to use our Crop Insurance Podcast AI.
Assumptions. A farmer has a malt barley contract with a contract price of $6.50 per bushel. The contract is for 60,000 bushels. Their approved yield is 60 bushels per acre. The farmer has seeded 1,200 acres of malt barley, and the underlying crop insurance policy projected price is $4.50 per bushel.
Using those numbers, this is how the math would play out. So we would take 60,000 bushels divided by the approved yield of 60. That means that a maximum allowable contract acres is 1,000 acres. Since the farmer seeded 1,200 acres, that means there's 200 acres of their malt barley that's not covered under this contract. So you're going to take the resulting 1,000 acres at the $6.50 a bushel, and then you're going to add to it the 200 acres at the $4.50 a bushel. Then you're going to take those numbers combined, and you're going to divide it by the total acres seeded of 1,200, and what you're going to end up with is $6.17 a bushel. If the farmer took the malt barley endorsement, they would then use that $6.17 a bushel for their projected price. Now, if they had only seeded 1,000 acres, then they would not have to use the weighted contract price. And so then they would be able to use the full $6.50 a bushel as their projected price if they took the malt barley endorsement. Now let's look at what it means to use that $6.50 per bushel as your projected price in relation to your coverage. If the farmer was in the yield protection program and they had a 60 bushel approved yield and they were at the 70% coverage level, Their guarantee would be 42 bushels per acre, whether they took the malt barley endorsement or not, because you do not convert into revenue when you're in yield protection until you get to the loss scenario. With yield protection, you either cut less than your approved yield times your coverage level in order to have a loss, or you don't. If you cut at your guarantee or above in yield protection, there is not a loss, regardless of having the malt barley endorsement or not, unless, of course, there is a quality adjustment factor, which we'll talk about in a little bit. If you're in revenue protection, you're going to now use that projected price from the contract versus the underlying crop insurance policy to come up with your guarantee. So if you have a 60 bushel approved yield, you're at the 70% coverage level, and your regular underlying federal crop insurance policy projected price is $4.50, your guarantee is going to be $189 an acre. Now, if you took the malt barley endorsement and you replaced that $4.50 with $6.50, your guarantee per acre is going to go from $189 an acre up to $273 an acre. Now, when it comes to setting the harvest price with the malt barley endorsement, you can go back and listen to part 1 of the malt barley endorsement where we discussed that at great length. But just as a friendly reminder, you do get to use the higher of the projected price or the harvest price in regards to your guarantee. And then any bushels produced are going to be multiplied times your harvest price. And just like with yield protection, if there's a quality adjustment factor, you're going to use that and multiply it times your production to count when calculating your loss. So let's take a look at what that quality adjustment factor looks like. In looking at the malt barley endorsement quality adjustment factor, we're going to be introduced to a new term called the local market price, otherwise known as the LMP. And to help get a better understanding of what that is, let's have our Crop Insurance Podcast AI give us a brief definition.
Local market price, aka LMP, is defined as the current market price of feed barley in the specific region or locality where the crop is being produced. The LMP is important for determining the value of the crop when calculating insurance coverage or indemnity payments, and will be calculated by the crop insurance adjuster when applicable.
What all this is leading up to is helping us determine what the quality adjustment factor is under the malt barley endorsement. So once you take your barley to harvest and go to deliver it to your end buyer, any barley that's rejected, those bushels are going to be used with the quality adjustment factor under the malt barley endorsement. The way they calculate that is your loss adjuster will come up with the local market price, and you will divide that number by the malt barley endorsement harvest price. That will then determine what your quality adjustment factor is. Any production that is taken as malt, you take 100% of that production. So if half of your production is rejected, you're going to take half of that malt barley production and multiply it times your quality adjustment factor. And then you're going to add that to the other half of your production that was accepted. That total production is then the production to count that you will use for the loss adjustment process. Depending on whether you're in yield protection or revenue protection, you will use those numbers accordingly, but that quality adjustment factor would then reduce the total number of bushels produced under this endorsement. It should be noted that any quality adjustment factors in the underlying policy that would be applicable will still be used to further reduce your production to count should they be applicable in your loss situation. At this point, I should mention, if you haven't already listened to our earlier episodes in Season 1 of the podcast where we discuss yield protection and revenue protection at great length, you should go back and listen to those and just use that production to count factor that we just discussed in the calculations to help determine your loss, and you can see how revenue protection and yield protection work differently in regards to a loss situation. Now that we know how the contract price works in terms of weighted or unweighted price and how that malt barley quality adjustment factor is determined and how it applies towards our production to count, we should have a pretty firm grasp on how the malt barley endorsement works. The next big step in trying to decide if the malt barley endorsement fits into your operation is to look at how much it costs. There are so many factors that go into determining what your premium rate is going to be that to go over a generic quote, really won't do you any good, as you need to sit down with your crop insurance agent who has a good understanding of your operation in order to give you an accurate quote so that you can see what the difference is in your premium dollars between having the malt barley endorsement and not having it. If you're like me, it's sometimes hard to learn from these math calculations just by listening. If you head over to our website at thecropinsurancepodcast.com, we have an article all about the malt barley endorsement where we break down some loss scenarios that will help you see these calculations to help further your understanding of how this program works. Towards the bottom of the article, you'll notice there's a sign-up form for our Malt Barley Endorsement Loss Calculator. We've developed a tool that allows you to plug in your numbers to help run estimations on losses, which should then help you further understand how the program works. If you're interested in gaining access to this calculator, simply sign up on that form on our website, and then we'll be in touch. I hope you've enjoyed this series on the Malt Barley Endorsement. It is a great program that has undergone multiple changes over the years to try to make it better for malt barley producers across the country. While still far from perfect, it's a great way to insure your malt barley for covered causes of loss that normally aren't covered on your underlying federal crop insurance policy. It allows you to take advantage of those higher prices that you contract your barley for and gain access to that quality adjustment factor that you normally wouldn't have access to. As always, you need to sit down with your crop insurance agent to go over your operation to get accurate quotes and figures to see how much it will cost you and what it looks like in terms of your coverage options. From my family to yours, thank you very much for listening. I sincerely hope that this presentation has been instrumental in enhancing your understanding of federal crop insurance. If you find value in our podcast, we kindly encourage you to subscribe and spread the word among your friends and neighbors. To access further information, please visit our website at thecropinsurancepodcast.com, where you'll find the latest podcast episodes, articles, and exciting new features conveniently located in one place. This information is not all-inclusive and is meant to be used only as general guidelines for educational purposes. For additional information, please see crop provisions, reference the Crop Insurance Handbook or Loss Adjustment Manual, or contact your crop insurance agent. This institution is an equal opportunity provider and employer.